Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have an interesting one for you this evening. My guest is Irene Previn, and I was actually lucky enough to meet her back in September 2019 when I was out in Phoenix, and she was traveling with a whole group of people from Australia, and it's the Victorian UFO Action. I believe that's what it's called. I just asked her a few minutes ago. I should know. Anyway, we are going to be talking about some really interesting cases in Australia. Some of them you may have heard of, and I think there's going to be some that you've never heard of. I hadn't heard of one in particular that we're going to be talking about. This is just a little bit different for you lucky YouTubers because Irene's given me a number of images and a couple of video clips to show you this evening while we're live on YouTube. And so I will try to link some of the images to the show notes too for the people listening to just the audio part of this show. So if you head on over to podcastufo.com, we have our weekly blog as usual by Charles Lear. This one is called Pilots and Planes Swallowed by the UFO. He always puts some interesting titles. And one of the topics in that blog he does talk about is the Frederick Valentich case, in which we will touch on tonight with our guest. Well, before I forget, next week I'm going to be sort of heading into the rabbit hole a little, as my guest is Whitley Strieber, and I actually invited him on the show years ago, and I had to have surgery at the time. So I had someone cover for me and they couldn't get the tech together. Anyway, it crashed. He got a little angry and I hadn't heard from him again, but I have heard from him recently because he has a new book out and we're going to be talking about that. And so get your questions ready for Whitley next week. We're going to be doing the show as we always do. We're going to break at the top of the hour. And during that break, for those of you on YouTube, and the podcast as well, we're going to play a clip and then resume the show. And half an hour later, we'll be taking calls. And if you'd like to put some questions in the chat room, if you remember to put the questions in caps so I don't miss them, because I can't pay attention to the chat room all that often. So anyway, I will scan through those to see if there's any questions. So I want to thank everyone behind the scenes that helps out. Our Facebook page, if you want to check that out, there's 20 some odd thousand people over there. It's pretty active. And that's facebook.com/podcastufo. We are simulcast over on Facebook as well as Twitch. And if you'd like to support the show, anyone can do that for $2 a month or more. And that's at our Patreon page. That's also, I think it's Martin Willis Podcast UFO at Patreon. And if you already support the show, I want to thank you so much. I could not do this show without you. And it's time for me to bring in my guest. Welcome to the show, Irene.
Hello. How are you?
Hello. Yes, and you're in the future. I said that with Paul Dean the last time I had him on a few weeks ago. You are tomorrow, so we know that we will make it through tomorrow. You're 10 o'clock in the morning over there, and you're 6 o'clock. Yeah, Wednesday, and we're Tuesday. So thank you for joining us. I really had the utmost pleasurable time talking to you out in Phoenix. It was a great, I loved your group. I loved hanging out with your group. Fun people.
Thank you. It was fun to meet you too. And it was fun to see all of the people that we'd been watching over here in Australia on YouTube and listening to the podcasts, and to see you guys in the flesh was pretty exciting.
Now, I say this, I've said this a number of times. Australia has something like 25 or 26 million people. Yet they are like the second most listening to this show. When I go through the analytics, it's either it's United States first, and it's either Australia or I believe the UK, and back and forth between Australia and the UK that listen to the show. It's pretty amazing for a country with not a ton of people in it. So what is the interest? Why is there such a big interest in UFOs in Australia?
I think because we have such a desert, a drought of UFO information. Much of the information and openness seems to be, believe it or not, coming from the United States. Of course, we know that the Latin American countries are much more open about UFO topics than the Western world seems to be, or the English-speaking world. However, because of the language barrier, it's difficult for us to access that information unless it's translated. So the United States is our biggest source of good quality information. We have very little support for people that do or either have had an experience or do study the UFO topic. We're much like Britain. I was talking to Jay from Project Unity recently, and he was saying that in Britain it's pretty much radio silence about the UFO topic, nothing forthcoming from the authorities. It's not encouraged to be spoken about amongst scientists. Pretty much the same here. The ridicule factor is still pretty high. People, I myself feel nervous about talking about my interest in UFOs, which came into this about 5 years ago. I was really not interested in the topic at all. And I really believed that people who saw UFOs, I had never heard of a mass sighting such as Westall. And I thought that people who saw UFOs probably had some mental health issues or were on some mind-altering substances. That was my belief.
And do you think that is like part of the culture there, that your feelings of it? I mean, the reason you felt that way is part of the that it's a fringe topic and weirdos and tinfoil hats and all that?
Absolutely. You could probably, I don't know if you could be fired from a job, and until recently life would be, and even now life would be very uncomfortable if you admitted it, and you get put into the new age basket perhaps, or not quite the lunatic basket, but you're a little bit left of center if you're into this topic. However, having more experience and more interest in it, I do ask regular people that I come across. I'll spontaneously meet a person and then just spontaneously ask them, have you ever seen a UFO or had an experience or strange experience in your life? And it's surprising the number of people that do actually come out and say, yes, I have. I've seen something strange or I've had a weird experience and I'd love to tell you about it. People that you wouldn't even expect or imagine that would admit to such a thing. And
And, since I've said this on the show a couple of times, since the New York Times article came out, things have relaxed a little in this country as far as the fringe element, and I feel more comfortable talking about it now. And I was just involved, like last 2 weeks ago, I submitted some artwork to an exhibit, and got to talking. I said, I can't do anything right now. I'm just about ready to go live on a stream. So the person there said, well, what kind of live stream? What do you do? And I said, it's UFOs. And I believe they're listening tonight. They listen to other shows, and hello, Laura. Yeah. Anyway, I feel more comfortable because of that. Has that had any direct effect, that particular situation where the New York Times article, does Australia pay attention to that type of thing?
Hardly.
Okay.
We have in our little circle of friends a couple of journalists, investigative journalists. One of them works for the government-funded TV and radio, is it a commission or a broadcast service, which is very conservative and very careful and very scientifically focused organisation. Excellent, good quality information comes out of it. It's called the ABC. And probably my favourite TV radio station to listen to because of the the broad nature and the intellectually stimulating conversations and information that comes out of it, yeah, it's quite surprising. They do cover it a little bit. They just poke at it with a stick. But Matt, the journalist, we were discussing, well, he has had a long interest in this topic, and he keeps on wanting to cover it a lot more. But they're very careful. I think the editors are very careful that the information is thoroughly fact-checked, and it's sort of like they have to, well, from what I perceive, that they have to see that the whole world is reporting on it first, especially the more conservative media outlets in the United States, before they will touch it. And even,
How about that?
I don't know that they may have covered the Tic Tac thing. Yeah, I think they did. They covered it. But it took about 6 months, a year more for them to actually cover it after it came out in the United States. So typically it would take at least a year or more for them to roll around to Australia. So there you go.
Yeah. So I know we're going to be talking about some cases. Someone already wants to know something. I'll post that up in a minute. But I know we're going to be talking about some well-known cases and then a couple of unusual cases during the show. My question to you is, so what happens to the person that has a extraordinary UFO incident and they go to talk about it? What happens to those people? Where do they go?
Oh, nowhere. There's nowhere. Since Project Blue Book in the 1960s, the climate has in the mainstream sort of awareness has just generally been really squashed. I mean, for example, I don't know whether we should talk about this now or later, but with the Westall witnesses, I dug up an article. I don't know if we'll get a chance to look at that, but it's an article from a magazine called Women's Day, and where three of the witnesses, the Westall witnesses, are interviewed. Yes, here we are. And one of the ladies, Pam, I've actually never seen her before, but she's never come to anything because she was saying in the article that she's never spoken publicly about the incident. She had never even been back to the place that it occurred, which is called the Grange. And when she told her father about it at age 15, he laughed at her and told her she was lying. She then wanted to commit suicide at age 17. She was hospitalised. She was given shock treatment, and she even said that she didn't even tell her husband and her 5 children until recently.
Oh my God! Wow,
this is really typical. And unless you're sort of mingling in New Age circles where there's a lot of openness and people encourage speaking about this sort of stuff, if you're one of the regular citizens, a salt of the earth type person, a mainstreamer, there's no way you'll be talking about this. It's only very recently, and especially since the New York Times article, a lot of people still haven't even read that. But especially since the Tic Tac thing came out, and still there's a lot of ignoring of it, or, people are not aware of it. If you say, have you heard about the Tic Tac incident? It's sort of like, oh yeah, I'll look at it later. This is an amazing admission, if not an amazing event, but an amazing admission. And to anybody who's not looked at any UFO stuff at all, to just see that and to see the data collected and how the military are taking it very seriously, or very open about taking it seriously. They've always taken it seriously, as we know. Just the response is lukewarm, to say the least.
Well, let's backtrack just a little bit, because you mentioned earlier when we started that at first you thought, people had issues basically that were interested in this topic until you found out there were mass witness sightings. So let's talk about, what is the change from you that was like the average person in your Australian society, I guess, that thinks it's a fringe topic, and how did it hit you on the head to make you look into it?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad you've asked. I was living in my hometown of Adelaide, and I'm a freelance graphic designer. That's what I've done all my life, my whole career. So I'm a creative person. I'm an artist. So I was looking around for a new project to take on, and there was one in Melbourne that interested me greatly, and that was to help run a community magazine. It was a 6-month contract. And so I thought, okay, I'll hop over the border and resettle here for a little while and do this project because I think it would be quite fun. And while we were brainstorming with the participants in the project, somebody mentioned that they would like to have a column on UFOs, like I have a UFO report regular. And I thought, that's really hilarious. That's really quite funny. That could be, great with, we could have wonderful drawings and pictures and paintings of UFOs included, and it would be just quite whimsical and hilarious. And then somebody pulled me up and said, well, actually, haven't you heard of the Westall incident? And I said, no, what's that about? And this person quite seriously told me that this was a mass sighting. About 250 people, many of them school children, but many members of the Westall community saw it as well, saw a UFO that visited a school. And so they pointed me in the direction of the excellent documentary that Rosie Jones made, which featured Shane Ryan as the investigator. So I sat down and watched that, and I was pretty much blown away. Like before that, just prior to coming over to Melbourne, being an internet surfer, I would like to look up different topics to expand my mind, to inspire myself for my artwork or whatever. I did at one point do a search on whether there were any people studying the UFO topics seriously, because when you do a quick search, all you see is the weird new age stuff, which I really couldn't relate to at the time. And I wanted to see if there were any scientific, things done in a methodical manner in the study of collection of data about UFOs. And I did find somebody in my hometown who is actually known over the world, Keith Basterfield, an excellent researcher who he approaches as a skeptic, but not a debunking skeptic, but as somebody who will genuinely look at whether it's the sighting is somebody's imagination or a misidentification, or actually there's something unusual in it. And he has uncovered a lot of cases where he's eliminated the mistake aspect and focused on, the unusualness of it. So I think he's somebody worth looking at. So I thought, actually, it's really frightened me when I looked at his cases, and I saw not only were there cases in the neighbourhood that I was growing up, at the time I was growing up, but that there are scientists seriously investigating this topic. That really frightened me because I thought, oh my God, this is probably real. And I put it out of my mind. Oh, that's Andrew Arnold. And he's interviewing, I don't know who he's interviewing. Okay.
That's Keith Basterfield.
Oh, that's Keith Basterfield. Oh God, I can't even recognise him. See, I've never met the guy. I've only talked to him on email, and he's a good friend he talks to my friend James Rigney quite a bit, especially about the Wilson documents. So he's done a lot of digging and uncovering there to establish whether the Wilson documents are truthful or real or not. So anyway, Keith Basterfield, even though he's from my hometown, I've never met him, and I have a great deal of admiration for him. Anyway, moving on from Keith Basterfield, back to the project and what brought me to Westall. The project was we were working in an area which was very close to the site of the Westall incident, and so I took my team and we went down and visited the site. We discovered that the local council has created a playground with a UFO, like a kids' play equipment. There it is, and that's Judith McGuinness from Geelong, who's also an investigator in the Geelong area. She's great. So that play equipment was put there to mark the spot, not the exact spot that the UFO landed, but the just to as a remembrance for the fact that it happened, to mark the place. And what's remarkable about Westall, interestingly, is we went down to the place and I found that it's a very unremarkable place. It's like Socorro, New Mexico. I found when we visited that place, there was nothing remarkable about it.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah, in its unremarkability. At the time that it happened, I think Shana has already covered this with your previous podcast, that it was an area, a semi-rural area on the fringes of the suburbs, and with market gardens. And now it's just fully suburban, no market gardens, and just that park, and then, not too far away from the school. So, okay, so to find out that there were so many people that had seen the same thing really turned my thinking around. And I thought, okay, I would like to meet these people. So the 50th anniversary rolled around, and I didn't see anything on Facebook or anywhere that was going to mark the event. And so I thought, okay, I'll invite people to a picnic. So I put out a public notice on Facebook and extended the invitation to the witnesses and anybody else who was interested in coming. And so we had a little barbecue. And I remember the day distinctly. It was raining. It was a light drizzle, and I was not sure that anybody would show up. And I had a T-shirt printed up with Westall on it so that people could identify me, at least as somebody who was the point of contact. I met the witnesses. And also what impressed me about these people was that their story had not changed after 50 years. The type of person that they were not hippie new agers or freaks or drug smokers or alcoholics or anything like that. They were salt of the earth people, and they were not looking for this encounter. They hadn't probably had any kind of other encounters after that. That's Colin. He's great. He was on the Oval when, and I think the slide you showed previously, he was showing us where he saw it. He was playing cricket, and he was pointing where it was hovering. The silver saucer that he saw was hovering just above the power lines. So if you can imagine the silver saucer just there.
One of the things, I know that I had Shane Ryan on this show a while back, and we talked about this story, but I think we should also approach this, not to get into too many details, because many people that listen to the show are aware of exactly what happened. But let's just do a nutshell of what happened. And I also want to tell you this one thing that happened after I had Shane on. I had someone contact me, and they said, that whole thing is a bunch of baloney. This was just some lights that they saw very far away. That's not the case. In anything I've ever seen or heard people talk about, there was a lot of interaction. But if you wouldn't mind, like in a nutshell, tell the person who's not aware of the case what happened that day, and what was the year? What was that?
It was April 6, 1966. It was around what we call morning recess time, which is sort of like morning tea for the kids. So the teachers and the students have a break where the kids get to run around for 15 minutes. And the teachers, from what I understand from the students, a lot of them went racing to the staff room to have a cigarette. So it was I think it was just before that time, and somebody came in and yelled that there was a UFO. They came into Mr. Andrew Greenwood's science class and yelled that there was a UFO outside. And I think he lost control of the class. From one of the reports, as the kids went rushing to the window to look outside, just to go, everyone's different story, but it was consistent that they all saw something hovering above the power line. Colin talks about it there, that it was quite distinctively a silver saucer, and there were actually three of them, three silver saucers. They were playing cat and mouse with, there were 5 Cessna, I don't know if they were Cessnas, but 5 light planes turned up, and it seemed as though they were playing cat and mouse with these light planes, and the kids were outside watching them. You have accounts from some of the girls like Joy Clark and what was her name? Anyway, some of the other ladies that were girls at the time went racing off to the Grange where they saw the saucers move in the direction of, and they got quite close to the saucer, which was hovering a few feet above the ground. So, yeah, this is the Grange. This is a little reserve not far from the school, where the kids used to do their athletics training or running around. And I understand that it was a site of teenage intrigue as well. The kids would get up to, like the older kids would get up to naughty things. They'd sneak off to the Grange and smoke cigarettes and kiss and stuff like that, stuff that teenagers do. So it was a well-known spot for the kids. I think in that last shot you can see the saucer in the background, the playground saucer. There it is in the bottom right. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell. There's a whole lot more to tell about that.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, there was a story that the teacher actually came forward, and if anyone that watched The Phenomenon, a movie by James Fox, will see that the teacher was visited, and he was visited by a one, I think he said a military one in a jacket that just said, you were drunk. I mean, this is the story that it's going to be told if you talk about this, that you were drunk and you didn't see anything. I mean, they were basically threatening to destroy his life. So he kind of hid in the shadows. And even on James' film, he wouldn't show his face.
The story behind the story of getting that interview is fascinating, because he was so traumatized by that visit that even in his, he's in his 80s, I think now, to the day that James convinced him to go on camera, he would not talk about it. And it took his students to, I think James took a little video of the former students, the Westall witnesses, giving him, and Joy, you see Joy there in the pink, she's one of them, one of the key witnesses, Joy Clark, and Sue Savage is the lady with the ponytail, the black hair in the front of the screen. They all sent him a little message on video that James brought to them to say, look, it's time. There's nothing that can happen to you. Please, for our sake, talk about, please support our story. Please say what you saw. And that did it, like the pleading of the students to, please, Mr. Greenwood, please, please tell your side of the story for our sake, did it.
Now, let me just ask you this, and then we can move on from here. But did any of the witnesses that you spoke to there, did any of them say that this was something life-changing to them? Did you have that feeling?
In that they were, whenever they spoke about, I mean, the climate until recently, as I've said, has been that of ridicule. If flying saucers or UFOs come up, and as they would do in a workplace or social situation, usually with ridicule, I remember them saying that, those that, like Joy is my hero. She's so strong. She would always say that, well, I had an experience and they're not rubbish. This is Joy. Oh, actually, I'm hiding behind her. This is a snippet from The Phenomenon, and that's my little cameo in the film.
That's your cameo right there?
No, I'm trying to hide behind. I'm the woman in black trying to hide behind the witnesses. So Joy actually said at this picnic, she said, I really felt for the victims of the Catholic Church, the children that were molested. She said, I know our case is nothing like that, nothing as severe as that, but I do feel for how those children were never believed. They had these awful traumas and they were told that they had imagined it. She said, I have a feeling of how they might, a little bit of how they might have felt in that they were never believed. And this is how all of those witnesses were, they were told to shut up. They were told to not talk about it. When the media were there trying to interview them about it, the media was shut down. And through their whole lives, there's been this climate of Australia of pushing it under the carpet, ignoring it, not talking about it. And they would have had to have arguments or heated discussions with people about, the truth of what they saw through their whole lives. So, I guess in that it would be pretty life-changing.
Yeah. And then we can just wrap this. Why don't we just wrap this part of the story up? So James comes to Australia. That's you with him. You meet him. Yeah. Actually, did you speak with James before he came to Australia?
I didn't, but James Rigney, my friend, did. This is James.
That's James Rigney there.
Yeah. He travels each year to the United States to attend conferences, and he's made a lot of friends in the UFO realm. James is an architect who lives in a nearby suburb to where I live. He actually approached me after Westall, the witnesses speak. He approached me after the Westall picnic that I held at the Grange, and I thought, who is this strange UFO guy? What does he want with me? And we went out for a coffee, and he convinced me that he was actually quite a regular guy and quite normal and not a weirdo, to my relief. And we worked on a plot. We actually wanted to I had a dream that the witnesses should be able to meet the public and answer questions about their experiences to anyone who's interested. So we plotted to make an event. He got the support of VUFO. I hadn't met anybody from VUFOA at that point, and he got me to meet the team, and they supported us in putting on Westall event, which we called Westall the Witnesses Speak. We hired a theatre, and we showed Rosie Jones's film with Shane Ryan. Shane came over, and Rosie came and spoke to the audience as well. So basically the format was we had the film and we had a Q&A panel. We had Rosie and Shane do a bit of talking, but mainly there was quite an extended question and answer session. Colin, that you see there, who's being photographed and interviewed by the media at the park in this picture here, he spoke on the panel as well. He actually came down from Queensland, and I don't think he'd been to the site for many years, for 40 or 50 years. He hadn't been, or maybe one visit to make the documentary for Rosie. But, they were happily answering questions from the audience. The event had a lot of interest. We had the tickets sold for it 2 weeks prior to the event. We had people lining up at the door wanting to get in on the day, and we had to turn people away. It was amazing. We didn't expect that we would have that much interest. It's sort of like people are secretly interested in Westall and secretly interested in UFOs. So it was quite incredible.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. That whole thing, I remember when I first started looking into this topic, that was one of the ones I thought was pretty solid. I wanted to put up, hang on just a second, one thing at a time here. Okay, here we go. I wanted to put up a comment that someone asked right here. It pops up on the bottom of the screen. So they wanted to know, what's the best and newest case in Australia that you know of? I mean, you talk about it's kind of hidden from the media, or do these things actually trickle into the media when there's something that happens?
Oh, I don't know that they particularly go to the media. They would probably go to a UFO group, depending on the area. So we've got a group in New South Wales that are very active. We've got a group in Queensland that are active. Best and newest case, I really don't know, because there's nothing of the magnitude of Westall at all. We've had individual sightings where people have seen something by themselves. Lots and lots of cases of, people write into us by email through our website, and I think, they obviously do to the other states as well. They write in about their experiences, but nothing of the magnitude of Westall, where there's 250 or more people that have seen the same.
And that's up to like 300 something, right? Isn't it?
I think it is. If you count, there's a lot of people, the adults that lived in the area, that worked in the area, that have passed away. I think if you estimate those, but I think Shane has spoken to over 100 people face to face about their experience. Well, that's a lot.
Right.
That was about, is it 3/4? No. I think in the interview with you, he said there were an estimated 500 people that would have been around or had seen it. But obviously he couldn't get to all of them because many of them were adults and passed away. So he's only focusing on the students that were 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, can I talk about an adult, or actually two adults, young adults that were in the vicinity that were not students at the school? Oh, that's the old Victorian UFO Action website. We've got a new website that's
okay.
UFO.net. That's
okay, no problem. Yeah.
For historical reasons, but we want to look at UFO.net, which is our current website,
All right.
where people can report things too.
I won't bring that up. I just thought about that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there's one gentleman, I don't know if you've got the photograph. There was one guy who was studying engineering who came up, who heard about from his uncle, I think, who lived in the area, and he came up to have a look at what was going on after it happened, and he witnessed the crop circle that was left in the grass. And then he came the next day. I think he was bringing his friends. He said, "Oh, well, come and have a look." And he turned up the next day, and the military all over it, busy destroying the evidence of the crop circle, or the landing traces on the ground. There are also, this hasn't come out in the film at all. There's so many stories. There are also some kids that snuck up and witnessed the military burning the grass and getting rid of the evidence. The military were all over it. There was this story I really like, and it's in the documentary, and that's Paul Smith was a young market gardener working next to the place with the trees that you see. That's him on the right there, that Paul Smith. He was pulling up carrots with his boss. His boss is a few meters away, and he just sort of looked up while he was pulling up the carrots, and he saw a silver craft not very far away from him. I think he said it was 100 feet away from him, and it was I can't remember the exact figure. Was it 20 or 30 feet up, hovering above the ground? So he was quite close. Another person that was quite close to it, I think Terry Peck was the person that was the closest to it. But what he saw was a silver thing, and he thought, what's going on? Is somebody projecting an image from somewhere? Is somebody playing a trick? And then as he was watching it, it cycled through the different colours like blue and green and purple, and it sort of looked to, he described it, it was looking like it was losing transmission. It was kind of crackling, or, like the static on the TV when there's no radio, no TV station at the end of the transmission. It's sort of like, it was sort of all staticky. And then it became translucent. And then he said it drifted down through the trees. And I said, do you mean that it was, because the trees are, quite, as you can see, quite close together, and I couldn't see how a craft of this size could go through the trees and dodge them. And I said, was it going around the trees and dodging them? How could it possibly go through the trees? And he said it was like the consistency of smoke. So it had become like a ghost. It had become ghost-like and drifted through the trees, which is quite amazing. And
it's not the first time I've heard something like that.
Yeah,
there are similar accounts, and some that almost make you think it's a multi-dimensional or something. It doesn't make any sense. But there are many cases where people will say that a UFO it'll be there, and all of a sudden it'll fade, and then, or sometimes just show up in another spot instantly. It's such a mystery of what the heck it could possibly be. Who knows? Yeah. So that was now, was that you said he was pulling up carrots. I love that. So was that anywhere near Westall?
That was right at the site. And then he said the children came running after a few minutes later, he could hear the patter of not so tiny feet running and chasing the UFO. And so he was at the receiving end where the UFO turned up, and then saw the kids chasing it. And the other thing that he said that was really interesting at the time, he said the following year in the area where the UFO had been, the potatoes, they planted potatoes in that spot, and the potatoes were huge. They were like footballs. They were abnormally large. And he said they were good for nothing. They had to chuck them out. They were not good for selling because they were just too big. So how do you explain that? There was some effect on the soil of the UFO apparently to make such big, I mean, growing the potatoes normally each year, and then 1 year after the UFO, the potatoes are just enormous. Why?
Wow. That is something. There are a few cases where you hear about the effects of, well, for instance, Travis Walton, where supposedly the craft came down. There's strange tree ring growths, that, so who knows what that, there's all types of speculation of what can do something like that. Some people say it's, radiation. I don't know if that's it. But
some kind of radiation. I think Jacques Vallée has made observations in his books about the effects on vegetation. So yeah. So let's see. We've got about 12 or 13 minutes before we go into our break, and so I would like to talk about the. Someone actually has a question here. Let me just pop it up. Did the potatoes get tested for radiation? Who knows? Who knows?
I know. Yeah.
Whether somebody was covertly testing all of this, but nothing has been released to the public. There are no files for anybody to access. Nobody has admitted anything officially on this. So as far as I know, they haven't.
Yeah.
It's just, these potatoes are too big, and then they just got chucked out. I think that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of James' film was also in Australia. I do believe it was Australia, where the gentleman took a Polaroid of this craft when he was out in his garden. That blew me away. That picture, that Polaroid, that's something that can't be faked.
That was in the same year. And in fact, I found I've got some old versions of the Flying Saucer Review, which is a publication from the predecessor of UFO, which is called VUFORS, the Victorian UFO Research. Victorian UFO Research, yeah, that's right. They had an analysis. I think I sent that to you. Did you get that email? There was an analysis, a very geeky, must have been by an engineer or some sort of very detail-oriented person on the Baldwin photo. And there was a little snippet of information which I've never seen before. I'm not aware of, and I'm not sure how many people are aware of it, but this is the original research is when the photograph came out in 1966. So this publication was printed around that time. So the photograph was taken, that was days before was it days before the school sighting from memory? But in the report that VUFORS released in this publication was that it was seen hovering near a school.
The same craft.
Not the same school, but it was. The house was, I think, opposite a school oval or something like that, which I was not aware of until yesterday. Yesterday I was looking through this stuff in preparation for the show. I thought, wow, who knows that? And that's another whole interview. We could talk about old research in Australia with Paul Norman, who was an American guy from Tennessee. He was born in 1916, I think, and died in 2012. He was an ex-Air Force guy, and he had his own sighting in the 1950s when he was managing a power station. He moved to Australia about 10 years later and married, I think, a local girl. And he was instrumental in bringing James E. McDonald over to Australia to talk and to investigate some cases. and he knew Alan Hynek as well. He also called Alan Hynek a born-again ufologist. He was a little bit skeptical of him because
that's not a bad term for him, for what happened. Yeah.
So he was, although he respected him, I think he was a little skeptical of him. He's a fascinating person to have a complete whole show about.
Yeah. So you also looked into the Frederick Valentich. I don't know if I pronounced that right.
Valentich. Fred Valentich.
Say it again. Valentich.
Yeah.
Valentich.
Yeah.
Valentich. Okay. Yeah, I've heard it's said many different ways, but that's probably the right way. You're right. So what have you looked into about that case? I mean, another fascinating case, but quickly, if you would, for the person that is unfamiliar with it, just in a nutshell.
Okay, so Fred Valentich left 40 years ago. He left the Moorabbin Airport, which is probably half an hour's drive from where I live, at dusk, and he reported an unusual object flying around him and over him to traffic control. And he, this is a very quick version. While he was talking to them, he vanished. He was never to be seen again. He was doing a quick run to get up his flying hours. He was wanting to train to be an airline pilot, so he was flying light planes. And he was a very skilled aviator in that he would participate in air shows and do loop-de-loops and crazy stuff. So he was apparently pretty good at what he did, and so he was no novice. Even though he was getting his hours up, he was adept at flying, and he knew his stuff and he was careful. We ran an event on the 40th anniversary of his disappearance, and we held it at the place he was last seen, which was the Moorabbin Airport, and they've got a little restaurant function centre there. So we held off our function there, invited people who were interested, and we had a very long seminar where Andrew Arnold produced the basics of the case, the introduction to the case as to what happened. And then we had one of the researchers that was there at the time working with Paul Norman, who investigated the case thoroughly at the time, and that's John Orchitel. And he gave a fantastic, very detailed rundown of how they investigated the case and what they discovered and what they couldn't discover. So there is a video of that. It's about 4 hours long. You'd have to break it up into lots of viewing sessions. But if you're interested in the John Orchitel part as to what happened there, that's really worth looking at. So, so it's a case that's spoken about all over the world, what happened to this pilot. I don't know how many other cases there are of, I think you're doing a show on it, aren't you, of people that have disappeared in airplanes?
No, that was a blog. We have a blog on our website now where Charles Lear, the blogger for this podcast, has written one. And that case in particular is in that as well, as just a listing, but it's not the only thing that has happened. There's a few others. There's the Mantell case where it didn't disappear, but it was a crash involved in that. And there's some others. I can't really cite them off the top of my head, but yeah, it's all interesting. Now, you had given me some pictures because you went to the area where supposedly it could have gone down. Is that what it is?
Well, we had at the event Steve Roby, the traffic controller, the last person that spoke to Fred Valentich, and he brought with him a couple of mates who were also experienced pilots, and one of them, I think, ran an airport, was managing an airport. And I don't know if it came out in the video, but I do remember him speaking up and saying that he's flown over the area countless times. There was a theory that Fred could have gone down in the forest. So I don't know. Do you want to bring up the pictures now? That's a picture of the forest, part of the forest. That's a canopy.
Yeah.
So
and
this amazing rugged coastline. It's a big tourist spot. That's a winter shot of it. But Fred was flying in springtime, so I don't know if we've got another picture which I've sent you, which shows the area.
I have the cute little koala bear. I love those things.
Okay, that shows that the area is thickly forested and koalas live there. So on one side, you've got this rugged coastline, and then inland is this amazing forest. And so the weather was not like that. It was apparently quite clear. It was, when he was flying, it was still light. It was fading light, but it wasn't actually nighttime. So about 7 p.m. our time in spring is still quite, it's just the light is fading. And he, so basically the search was taken over the sea. So we've got this is the bottom of Australia, where we've got a very tempestuous ocean leading to Tasmania. And so they thought maybe he could have gone off course and vanished in the ocean, or maybe he could have gone off course and vanished over into the forest. And so this fellow who ran the airport, the experienced aviator, I can't remember his name, was saying that, if he had perished in the forest, they would have probably found the remains of the craft, but nothing has been found. Rhonda Rushton, I don't know if you can bring up the picture of Rhonda at the lighthouse.
Oh, yes, I have that one, yeah.
Rhonda was his fiancée. She knew him very well, and I did an interview with her. She was very close to him preceding his disappearance. He was planning, there was a theory that he was suicidal. He was apparently not suicidal at all. He was a happy guy, and they were planning to get married and have children. And she was actually going to be on that flight with him, but through a amazing set of circumstances, she missed out on getting onto that, because he would take her on little joy rides around the area. And because in the days of no mobile phones, she wasn't able to get in contact with him and say that she was running late. And so he took off on his scheduled flight without her. And so it could have been two people disappearing, not just one.
Sure.
So tragically, she was saying at the time she did not want to believe that it was a UFO. He never even mentioned the word UFO when he was talking about it.
He said it's not a plane.
It's not a plane. He never mentioned the word UFO. Important point, because there's a lot of media. It's interesting because if he died in a motorbike accident or a car accident, would he have been? There's a lot of ridicule and running down of his character, that he was an idiot or whatever. But if he had died in some other sort of tragic accident, would there have been all of this air of ridicule around it? No, I don't think there would have been. That's quite interesting.
Wow. We're just about ready to go into break here, and so in that we have just a minute and a half. But I did want to just prime the people. So maybe we'll pick up a little bit more of the Valentich, however you say it. I'm terrible at remembering how to say things like that. But anyway, we're going to be talking when we come back from break. We're going to be talking about this incident, and for those of you in YouTube, you can hear listen and watch a clip that I'm going to be playing during our break. But this is a very, very interesting case of the Knowles family that happened in 1986. I want to say something like that.
86 or 88, in the 80s.
Thereabouts. But anyway, we are going to head right into the break. So those of you on YouTube, you can watch this clip, and those of you on KGRA radio, we'll be right back right after these messages.
Well, to the Knowles family in Adelaide, thanks for joining us. And 36 hours now after the event, do any of you have any doubts as to what happened? Do you still believe that it was a UFO that landed on your car?
Yes, we do.
Why do you believe that?
Because we actually saw it, it was chasing us, and all of a sudden it landed on our car, pulled our car back, and I put my hand out the window, and I fell on the roof.
What did you feel?
It was like a sponge on the roof. It was sucking the roof, the car. It was a sponge. I saw it.
How big was it? What did it
It
look
was
like?
about, I don't really know. I can't really explain.
Did you see anything but a light?
Um,
Not really. It was
I can explain it. It was shaped like this. Hang on. It was shaped like this. Had like a little circle in the centre, and that was like a yellow sort of colour. And it had on the outsides, it was sort of shaped like that, and on the outsides it was like that, and in the centre it was like that. And I asked my brother, if that was a spaceship, and he goes, "Don't be stupid." So I got up closer to have a look, and it was moving backwards and forwards. And so we decided to take off to have a look. We decided to take off, and it was flying miles back, and I drove miles up the road again, and it was in front of us again.
How high off the ground was it?
it was on the ground.
I mean, it was on the
It
ground.
was on the ground, facing us when we were driving along.
And then, so it was moving along with you?
Yeah, it was following us.
And then eventually you tried to get away from it, is that right?
It was still chasing us.
Sean, you were driving. How fast did you get up to?
I got up to about 200 kilometres.
That's very fast. Have you driven that fast before?
No, I haven't.
And the car is capable of doing 200 kilometres an hour?
Yeah.
And at what stage did the object land on your roof?
Oh,
How fast were you going at the time?
I was doing about 200. I got a blowout, and once the car stopped, I blinked out, and I don't know what happened after that.
It was definitely on the roof.
How do we know you're telling the truth?
Oh, there was even witnesses.
But a lot of people think that you are making it up. Do you realise that?
That's not true. No way.
When it landed on the car, what happened?
We were screaming and yelling.
And as soon as it landed on the car, that's when my tyre blew out.
Smoke started coming in the car.
Smoke started to come in the car,
Sort of like onions.
and that's when I just blanked out.
There was one report that your voices changed, is that correct?
Yes, they did.
I did.
In what way?
Really deep and slow, and I don't know. We started sounding like that.
Can
like
you-
it, real deep, deeper than that even. It was so deep, it's really hard to explain. More or less like our voice kind of died out as we were talking.
If a car has a blowout at 200 kilometres an hour, there is a danger, isn't it, that it will overturn. How
That's
come you
right.
didn't?
There was weight on the roof.
Okay, Martin, stand by. We're coming back in about 15 seconds. Stand by. In 3, 2, 1, go.
All right. Welcome back to the show. My guest tonight is Irene Previn, and we were talking about this very unusual case. Irene, welcome back.
Thank you. Well, what did you think of that? Do you think they were lying?
I thought they were very on edge. And for the person at KGRA Radio, we're basically this family is all 36 hours after the incident. They're all almost being interrogated. They all seem nervous. I don't see any signs of that they're lying. It's a very unusual story, though. Especially this gas comes in the window and makes their voices change. And I didn't know. I mean, a car can go 200 kilometers an hour. That's, what is that? 160 miles an hour or something for. That's really fast. And it's bizarre. Like if you blow a tire at that speed, you'd think the car would be flipping over. But I what are your thoughts on that whole? And we're going to play another clip here in a second too.
I
But what are your
remember
thoughts?
at the time, and there was a lot of ridicule. It was so bizarre. It was so bizarre that nobody could believe it. Yet you can see that they're a salt of the earth family. They're from Western Australia. This is not a Victorian case. This is another, I think it was investigated by Paul Norman anyway. Paul Norman thoroughly investigated this case. Yes, he did. You can see that they're not the sort of people that would be into UFOs or imagine this. That's my feeling. At the time, I just passed it off alongside everybody else's. Oh, this is so nonsensical. We can't cope with it. Put it out of our mind.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they all seem very shy too.
They're shy. The car she was driving, it was a brand new car, so clearly they were working hard to get that car. So they were sort of like in the Westall Witnesses, ordinary working people that don't bullshit. And I don't see, they had a lot of shit, or if I shouldn't say that word on the air, but they had a lot of, disbelief, especially by the media, laid on them because nobody knew. I think if it happened today, there would be more of an openness and people think, oh, yeah, there is a possibility, understanding a little bit more about, the weird wonders of physics and time. And, there's more stuff on the internet to read about, other experiences that people have had of time seeming as though it had slowed down. Now, I want to sort of highlight another case which happened in 1967 in Western Australia, so not exactly the same area, but a similar area in the middle of nowhere out in the outback. And this fellow they called him Mr. Harris. I'm not sure if it was his real name.
No, I'm wondering if we could follow up though with the other clip on this first before we get into that case, because that case that is one I do want to talk about. So let's play this the second clip that continues on with that same family being interviewed. Here it goes.
Was the car on the road at all times, or was it lifted off as has been reported?
We don't really know, but
How long was it with you, this object?
for about 5 or 10 minutes, we think.
Were there any sounds or smells?
Yes, there
There was a
was.
sound, and it sounded like a humming sound. It sounded like boom, boom, boom. And when it was on the roof, I wound down my window and all this smoke started coming. It was like a greyish black mist. And that's when our voices started to change. All of us, our voices just went really deep and strange. And we felt like we were dying. And my brother chucked the brakes on the car and this thing just shot off. And as it shot off, we just hid out in the bushes, got out the car, hid out in the bushes, waited for about 10-15 minutes. Went over back to the car, took the wheel off, chucked that in the boot, got the spare wheel out, put that on, and we just let down jack. We didn't worry about the jack, we just chucked the jack in the bushes, and we just shut off. And then it started to follow us again. And it started to come by then it was starting to get daylight, and it just seemed to lose us for some reason. We turned the headlights off, and that's when it lost us.
Patrick, had any of you been drinking?
No way, no.
Were you tired?
I was a bit tired, yeah, but not tired enough to see a thing like that. And
How scared were you, Patrick?
I was really scared.
Terrified.
Scared as I've ever been.
Well, what was your feelings? What were you feeling at the time when this was all
We're
happening?
going to die. That's what I felt like. We just made us feel like we're dying.
Have you had any unusual feelings since it happened?
A bit sick or
I
something.
won't turn the lights off at night. I'm too scared to go to sleep.
Any other feelings? What about you, Wayne? How do you feel about it all?
Pretty scary, mate.
What was the worst part of it for you? Would you be happy to go back there and have a look around to see what had happened?
Not really. I don't want to go back.
So just summing up, do any of you have any idea, Wayne, Sean, you think it was a spaceship. What about yourself, Mrs. Knowles? Do you have any ideas?
I reckon it was a BFO or something, because it was strange. It was following us everywhere, wouldn't leave us alone. I was a nervous wreck when I got up to the garage. So.
Well, thank you very much for telling us your story, and take it easy on the roads.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, where was this? It was in a desolate area, right? Was it the outback actually?
It was a stretch of road called the Nullarbor Plain, because it has absolutely no trees. So it's pretty much a desert area, and it takes 4 days. I think 4 days to drive from Adelaide to Perth. So that gives you an idea. It's a very long stretch of road. So
where does someone get fuel, petrol on?
Oh, I think there's a couple of fuel stops. It's pretty much virtually nothing, like tiny towns or a few. I haven't actually been across there myself, but I know people who have. And so, yeah, there are virtually no townships or very few townships along the way. So very desolate. There was another witness, at least, a truck driver. They said that there was a lady truck driver who saw what happened as well. There was another news report, which I've sent to you, we may not have time to look at, where a journalist delved into it and said that at around the same time there were some fishermen at sea, some fishing ships that were being harassed by a UFO. So, yeah, there was certainly something going on repeatedly at that time. And if I just go back to that other case, which I've discovered recently, in 1967, a similar thing happened in a similar place to a guy who didn't have any witnesses, but they did put him through a psychiatric examination as well. He was driving at 60 miles an hour. This is before our metric conversion, so we were using miles per hour. And he had a light immerse him. Like, he was immersed in a beam of light which had emanated from a UFO that had turned up. And he had this sensation that the car had stopped. So it instantaneously stopped, going from 60 miles an hour to stopping. And they had a physicist, this is the VUFOR's people who examined the case, had a physicist comment on this. The physicist really had a problem that the car was able to stop completely with no feeling of deceleration and then start up again. And the driver, the witness, reported that the radio and the engine and everything had stopped during the time that the beam was on him. The physicist was saying if there's no feeling of deceleration and the car had stopped, it would have played havoc with his body. He could not have stopped. It would have been impossible. So no change of speed, and he would have and it would have affected the car as well. So, yeah, it was a similar thing where an object appeared, like a bright light appeared, hovered over the car, shone its beam down, created these strange effects, and the witness survived to tell the story. And, yeah.
Now, those people,
a lot more to do, but briefly, that's it.
Yeah. If I was doing that interview, not that I'm any better than the interviewer at all, but I mean, I would ask, okay, so he blacks out. I can't remember his name, the one that was driving. He said that he just blacked out and he doesn't remember what happened. Well, what about everyone else? Did they black out too? I mean, they didn't. There was no discussion about that. But it sounds like a failed abduction attempt or something like that, possibly. But it just seems like there's still a lot more question to ask that family. Did they ever talk about it after that? That was only 36 hours after the incident.
They were grilled by the media. It was a media sensation. And then they were so badly treated about that they refused to talk about it to anyone ever again, which is really tragic, because I think they could have a lot to offer if people ask the right questions. And I think I'll try and dig up a little more about that, what was encountered at the time by the UFO researchers. But certainly there was an interview that I don't know, we probably won't be able to show that one, where there's a well-known journalist called Darren Hinch. He's very well known here in Australia, and he even made it to Parliament. He was until recently serving as an independent member, I think, in Parliament. And he made himself known for supporting people who had been cases of victims of sexual abuse. And he got into a lot of trouble because he would name the perpetrators on air and cause a lot of controversy because he wasn't supposed to do that. But he would be supporting of survivors of abuse. Yet he himself, when he was interviewing these people at the time, made a disparaging comment about little green men, and he just made it plain that it was an unbelievable story. And I thought, on one hand, these people have been traumatized by something very weird, and he does not support them. Yet, I just found that confusing that he would, believe one case but not believe another.
Yeah, that's not too kind. That's a very interesting case. I don't think I ever heard of that one. Now, I think the woman said that she reached up on top of the car and it felt like a sponge sucking or something like that. Did anyone ever look at the surface of the top of their car?
Yeah, they found that there was a whole lot of dust, like black dust, and it was taken in for analysis, and we don't know what the findings of. I think that they were not able to conclude what it came from, but once again, that's something that needs a little more scrutiny. A lot of mysteries about the case and the physical evidence.
Now, when we go back, we have a question came up. Just a second, I'll ask that. Going back to the Westall case and the teacher that was harassed, he mentioned that there was one military person in uniform. So does the military, as far as you know, in Australia get involved in these cases and looking into them, or were they also the people that were telling them at Westall not to talk about this?
Yeah, the witnesses report that people in uniform turned up. When I asked them, can they remember any kind of insignia on the uniform, nobody could remember seeing any insignia. I think it could be a couple of things. They were children and they didn't think to take notice and there was a lot going on. Or maybe they were just wearing uniforms which were not marked, which was a bit strange. So, and even the adult, as far as we know, Andrew Greenwood did not, I don't know how we couldn't have noticed if it said Army or Air Force or Navy. I think that would have been something that stuck in his mind, but that didn't come out. He may have been asked, I'm not sure. I would be surprised if he wasn't asked if he remembered what sort of, but I believe that they were unmarked but military looking. Actually, Kevin, the witness who saw the circle left, the trace left in the ground, I think he also couldn't, he was a uni student, he couldn't remember any kind of markings or insignia. And also you'll see in the documentary that they turned up really quickly. It was as though they knew that it was, if you look at the distances that the military-based people would have to travel, they were onto it. They were aware that it was happening because of the speed at which they showed up after the saucer was present.
Yeah, that is not an uncommon theme you hear. You hear about that, that they somehow seem to show up. You know, you talk about like Kecksburg. There's a bunch of incidents where the military, all of a sudden, they're just instantly there. And this question is from Mario. He wants to know, do you know anything about the Middlemount Queensland UFO case of July 2019?
No, sorry.
You've never heard of that? Wow.
Well, Queensland's on the other side of, it's like, where are you? You're around New York. It's like I don't know.
It's on the other side?
It's on the other side of the country. We don't really cover the cases. It's a big distance away. So it'd be like you covering a case on the other side of the United States. It's the difficult.
Do they
we interact, but we might hear about stuff. But I personally, I'm sorry, I don't know about that case.
Sure. Is there, you know, how you have the Victoria UFO action? Is there a group over in Queensland as well?
Yes, there is. We have some interaction with them, but because of the distance, we can't sort of travel to. I think some of the people in our group do have more interaction or have been to their conferences, but I don't know much about what's happening there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, David makes a good point here. David from the UK. The military were probably within 20 minutes, so they were probably tracking it. And that's really interesting take. Yeah, that could be it. They may have been tracking it to the school when that happened.
There might have been. And then there's a mystery of the airplanes. I think if anyone who's interested in the Westall case will know that the airplanes, the logbooks were checked at Moorabbin Airport. I think Shane went and looked at trying to get who might have been flying those planes, but there were no entries, which is quite bizarre. There were 5 planes seen flying around by many people, but there were no records of who was flying those planes.
Isn't that something? So they don't know if they were military planes or not, basically. Yeah. What a mystery. And yeah, I know we already talked about that. It's just one of those. It's probably your Roswell, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely our Roswell.
And a case that, but would you say that you think that's a consistent case? Roswell's not so consistent, but that case in particular seems fairly consistent with the witnesses.
Yeah, I think what Shane has done is a pretty thorough job. He has a Facebook site which he keeps, it's a closed group where he keeps everybody informed when he finds out something. So he's constantly, well, not constantly, but every now and then something will pop up where someone has approached him or he's found another person who has information relating to the case. So I think it was talking about in your interview about the person who was a descendant of a personnel from the Department of Supply who had kept a journal, and the journal has mysteriously gone missing. The family don't know where it is. I don't know what's happening with that. But that was sort of like a lead that seemed to go somewhere for a little while, which would be interesting to see if he's got any more information on it. I'm really waiting for Shane's book. He promises that he will be writing and releasing a book, and that would be fantastic if he could do that quite soon.
Yeah, I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but I do want to go back to the Knowles case where we were talking about, because I'm kind of like churning things over in my mind after we watched that clip. And it's really bizarre. I can't think of any other incident anywhere where anyone has ever talked about like a mist being sprayed into their car. And then it changed their voice level. I mean, if you were going to make up a UFO story, would you put that in it? I don't think so. It's such a bizarre thing.
If you read Vallet's cases, it's impossible to read through all of them, but I had a crack. But there are some similar things, and I think I want to go and dig out something about mists occurring. I don't know whether the mist had something to do with their voices changing, but I suspect if from other cases, this is not unfamiliar actually after reading his collection of accounts, where it seems as though time has slowed down and their voices is as though time is going very, very slowly, and perhaps the voices, you know, when you slow down a recording, that's
I didn't think of it in that manner.
Yeah.
I was thinking that their voices just changed, but you think so? You think that's all part of the time slowing, possibly?
I don't know. I'm not a physicist.
What?
I'm just a humble artist, and I know nothing. But
yeah, well, it's definitely a curiosity as what that was about. But I mean, I'm wondering. You know, you say the family isn't really active in talking about it, but I'm wondering if there was any side effects later. You know, like a year later, 2 years later, did anyone have any health issues related to that?
It would be very interesting to know that, but I completely understand how after they were treated and the environment at the time that they wouldn't want to talk about it. And they looking at it now, it's quite clear that they were very traumatized by it.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they received any counselling or they were offered any counselling. It doesn't look like they were.
Well, they certainly didn't do it for sensationalism or making money, because especially if they don't want to talk about it anymore.
They wouldn't have made a send out.
Wasn't a motive.
To share it. It was really brave of them to share it, knowing the ridicule factor that was around, especially in Australia at the time. But I think that they were concerned that it would happen to someone else, and that's why they spoke about it. And they, it was like a cry for help. What's going on? Please tell us what has happened to us. We don't want someone else going through the same thing.
Right. This Night Stew put up that Betty and Barney Hill had a pink powder sprayed on their clothes and car. I wasn't aware of that. Maybe I don't remember ever talking about that, but it's very, very possible. I do remember something about the dress, but I just don't remember anything about a pink powder. But the next time I speak with Kathy Martin on that case, I'll try to remember to bring that topic up. Someone said it was disinfectant spray. Yeah, because we're alien to them. Yeah.
Well, Grant Cameron writes about all of the bizarre things that he's a great analyst in that he collects the stories and looks at them thoughtfully. And his conclusion is maybe a lot of this, and I think Valet talks about this as well, a lot of this has no purpose except for getting our attention. Maybe the spray or the powder had no purpose, but it was just something left there by whatever intelligence this is to connect with us in a bizarre way, or to make us think, or to make us look into something. It's part of the theatre.
Yeah. Well, I had, speaking of that, along that line, I was helping out last night with the SCU, which is the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. A lot of scientists are involved in that. And there was a gentleman on there, Peter, speaking about the Drake equation and his thoughts on that. And so I got into a bit of a discussion with someone in the chat room about, because a gentleman posted in there that UFOs with lights aren't really UFOs, because why would they have lights? So we got back and forth and went back and forth with the discussion. Well, how do you, what is your evidence for this, that it's not he said extraterrestrial. And I said, I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial. We don't know what it is, but what is your evidence? And he said it makes no sense unless with propulsion, which I agree, it makes no sense. But then again, here you are talking about maybe so we'll pay attention. Maybe that's it. I don't know what the reason. They really don't need lights, but a lot of them have lights.
Well, this is what I've just read in Grant's excellent book, Contact Modalities. And he says the same thing. They don't need lights. They can be invisible when they want to be. And it's like as though they switch their lights on so that we can see them.
It seems maybe, yeah. Yeah. I mean, right. They don't have to show themselves, but obviously they're not afraid of showing themselves. I mean, my one UFO sighting, whatever it was, wasn't hiding. It's not like it was huge and over me, but I mean, it was very visible. And so I don't know. No lights on it though, but the whole thing had what I saw had a blue glow around the whole thing. And I have only heard a couple of people say something similar. So anyway, any other interesting cases? I'm going to be taking calls here in a minute, but any other interesting cases that you've looked into?
Oh, well, there's a few recent ones. We're sort of still mulling over them. One case where a husband and wife captured on video a very bright light over their property and a very strange humming sound, and something unusual on the video, but we couldn't really work out what it was. But they lived in a bushland property, a little bit remote, And this is, going back a year or a couple of years ago, maybe. And when we examined what they showed us, it wasn't the light was coming from above and sweeping over their area, and it didn't look like it was a truck or a car. So, yeah, once again, the lights. And they felt this. They felt and heard this humming sound, and they felt disturbed and frightened by it. Another one just days ago or late October.
Just before you move on from that one, though, let me just ask you this one. Do you think that they felt, I've heard people say that they felt the noise more than they heard it. Is that a description that they would say?
I think that's how it was. They heard it as well. It was a vibrating humming, very strange. It was unnerving to them. That's why they contacted us. And another guy went outside to take his dog to the bathroom to do his bathroom duties outside, and witnessed a silver, not a silver, I think he said it was a cigar-shaped thing with lights drifting across the sky. He called his wife and she came out and saw the same thing. We have another fellow who we talked to whose wife saw, I think it was a triangle fly quite close over the roof of their house, and she called him and he came running out and he witnessed it going off. And he'd had an experience earlier in life with seeing a landed craft and some beings in another country where he was from. So
wow.
it's ongoing. It amazes me that it's not just in the United States, it's worldwide. Here on the other side of the earth, there's a surprising number of cases, even though our population is quite low. And not just looking at cases of people seeing things individually, we're two people. In the case of this fellow where he saw the landed craft and the beings, he was with a family member. So, there were two people that saw the same thing.
Interesting. Are you familiar, I'm putting this up from Brian, of the Bendigo UFO wave in the 1980s?
I must admit I haven't looked at it, but I know that there have been waves. I'm reading now because, as I said, I'm a new kid on the block and I'm still coming across. But, it seems like Bendigo, that region could be a little bit of a hotspot, as in I'm reading about the east of our state. Bairnsdale is another kind of not very highly populated sort of dairy country and forest, and that's certainly a hotspot. And our president of our group, Ben Hurl, is from that area. So he's pretty much interested in the cold cases of the past, and he actually does go to Queensland and give talks to the people up in Queensland, and he's very much into these cases of the past.
Are you talking about Ben Hurl?
Ben Hurl, yeah. He's somebody to talk to about the bent headlights case.
Let's talk about that too. That's always fascinating. But before we do, I just wanted to let people know, especially over at KGRA Radio, that we are taking calls now, and that number is 855-472-5483. That's 855-472-5483. Bill is standing by. He'll screen your call, and I'll bring you into the show. So feel free to call in. Yeah, let's hear about the bent headlights case. I know I talked about that. I think I talked about that with Paul Dean.
Look, you're probably better off sticking to Paul and Ben. That's not one that I'm really across the details of, but that's very unusual case.
Yeah, and where the lights turned, another thing that absolutely made no sense at all.
Well, we had a fellow come out who's actually a very well-known radio broadcaster, a bit of a personality. He's written a song for the football that gets played at the grand final every year. Mike Brady, his name is, and he was a young man in a band, and he was travelling around the countryside. And they said around that time and around that place, they had a weird encounter where they heard a strange noise, heard and felt this strange noise, and the cars, they were in a van, I think, and the van came to a stop. And there was nothing wrong with the van. It was a brand new van that had no mechanical issues whatsoever. And they came into this area around where the bent headlights thing happened, and it came to a stop for no reason. And then I think later on it mysteriously started up again. I think I've got that right, but that's the guts of the story. So, for this guy to come out and say, yeah, well, I've had a weird thing happen around the time and in that place as well.
So it must be
information.
Yeah. So we're talking a couple things happened that you're aware of where the Westall case happened. So there are, like we have here in the United States, seemingly, are some hotspots. I mean, what else would you call them, right? I mean, there's more than one sighting on different days. And yeah. On the last one, someone wanted to know if there was any missing time. Did they mention that?
Well, I don't. Yeah, I can't answer that question. The case of that was similar in 1967. The Mr. Harris remarked that he had a bit of missing time. His watch stopped, and it was running 5 minutes slow, and the watch was an Amiga chronometer, and it normally doesn't lose any time at all, he said. So he had in the duration, I think it was a 5 minute, 5 minutes that he was in the beam and the car stopped or appeared to stop. So he lost that time, that 5 minutes, and it affected his watch. So, in relation to the Knowles case and that similar case, I think it looks like missing time, doesn't it?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. The missing time thing, it's funny. People allude to it so often that they have that, I mean, I can't even remember the first time I heard about it, but it seems to me, one of the fascinating ones for me in that particular case is we have this case up here in Maine. It happened in Maine way back in, I think, the late 1970s, called the Allagash incident. And have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but remind me of the details.
Well, they're out there. There's 4 guys. They're out in the canoe. They're way in very remote area of Maine, extremely remote. And they saw earlier that day, they saw a light. They saw something with someone else that witnessed it with them. Then they're out in their canoe to go night fishing. They built a great big fire so they'd know how to come back to shore. So they're out in the canoe, the 4 of them. And this thing comes right over them. And Chuck, one of them, did something kind of silly. He flashed a light at it, a flashlight, started blinking the light at it. Yeah. And so then all of a sudden all these things happen. They don't really remember. But what they do remember is when they were going back to shore, the fire was burnt down, all the way down. And it would have taken hours for that to happen, and they didn't even think of it. It was like that's weird, that type of thing. And then 10 years later, they started having the dreams. They all had the same dreams. And basically it had suppressed it for about 10 years before it came out. Let's see. I'm going to bring Bill in. Bill has a couple of questions for you, so I'm going to bring him in. I've never done this before, but Bill, you're a great guy, and you always have some great thoughts. I saw you putting something in the private chat here. So you had a question?
Yeah, I don't know how my volume is because you just got me on.
You sound good. Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of folks that believe that the consensus is that people have traumatic experiences when they're engaging with extraterrestrials, allegedly. In Australia, with your contact with people that have had experiences, what is the folks over there going through? Do they think that the majority are malevolent in nature, benevolent? Is there a balance?
Look, Mary Rodwell collects more data from people who have had experiences with beings. I think if there's an experience with just a craft, it's and you're not looking for it, it's like, what the hell is this and why is it here? And that in itself is traumatic because it's we're not primed to expect a UFO visit because of the taboo around the topic. So it comes, I think, even though the experience itself might be benign, it might come across as being threatening in that there is the unknown and the unexpectedness of it. Yeah, I mean, we've had people that have had reported very clear waking dreamlike states where they felt either, yeah, it's the same as in the, from what I'm reading, it's the same as anywhere else in the world. It's a mix, or it might start off as feeling threatening and then progress to, if it continues to progress, to being non-threatening, you know, in the way that Whitley talks about it. I think I haven't read his books. I've been a bit too frightened to read his books, but from what I understand of what I've listened to, what he has had to say, that he had started off with it being threatening and then coming to terms with it and feeling differently about it later on. So, yeah, I think it's consistent with what happens elsewhere in the world, to answer your question.
I want to show everyone, this is Bill, everyone on YouTube. Hi, Bill. Bill's, oh, yeah, he's pointing to my painting that he has there. So, yeah, Bill is the one who screens for those of you that call in. He's over at KGRA Radio, and he's the one that takes the calls. So we do have that available. Again, that phone number is 855-472-5483, and feel free to call in. Bill, you have anything else?
Yeah, just a couple of more things. As far as the Australian society in general, do you think they're more open-minded? Because over here, it's still, I would say, Martin, maybe you can clarify this a little bit. What would you say the consensus here in the States? About 40%, 50%, maybe even higher, of people having an open mind when it comes to the possibility of extraterrestrial life? I would say that would be high. But about actual visitations that were being visited by extraterrestrials, or maybe interdimensional or some other parallel universe, whatever that is. What do you think it is over there, Irene? Is it more open-minded over there, or accepting of the possibilities there?
I think people who are in the community vary in their degrees of, like in the United States, it's a diverse community ranging from the nuts and bolts people who are just interested in the craft and not particularly interested in who's piloting them. And then there's on the other gamut of people who've had, who report having abduction experiences or contact experiences. So amongst the community, it's pretty much the cross-section is similar to what's in the United States. But as far as the general society of people outside of the community, no. It's amongst the younger generation, because of the documentaries and TV shows and science fiction that has primed the younger generation. I'm talking about people under 50. There's much more openness, and people are happy and willing to talk about and explore ideas as to what it could be or what's out there. It's a big universe, etc. But certainly people who are above 50, 60 of that generation that was successfully conditioned by, don't be silly, there's no such things as flying saucers. There's absolutely, if you talk about it, you find that you'll hit a brick wall, and that, yeah, there's no such thing, that they believe there's no such thing. But that varies too. I mean, I think Australian society is starting to open up, especially since the New York Times and the Tic Tac thing. But quite often, 9 times out of 10, you'll talk to people and they have not even heard of that case. And there's sort of like not really an interest.
Yeah.
What's going on with the Kardashians is much more important.
Well, I've got to go take some callers. We got callers on the line, but maybe you guys can also touch on Pine Gap and the mysteriousness behind that. So see you guys. Have a great show.
All right. Thanks, Bill. So yeah, we have he's screening a call right now. We'll take that call, and as soon as he's done with that. And so yeah, Pine Gap. That's a series I've watched a little bit of. Is there really something going on with that? I mean,
Pine Gap. Well, it's a listening station. It's I think it's well known here that it's a base in conjunction with the United States. There's actually a really nice TV show called Pine Gap.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I've watched that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a spy station, and it's sort of looking at and I think there's a lot, as you realise, with the military, that there's stuff that they definitely are doing that they'd be happy to have people look at something and say, that's a UFO. And yeah, okay, it's a UFO. Just don't keep looking at that and don't look at what we're doing. So Pine Gap, I believe, falls into that category. I don't know that it's, I really can't say whether it's an underground base and there's UFOs flying in and out of it. We did talk to somebody who was a child that lived in that area because his parents were working in that town, and of course they come across the military that work there. Apparently, Pine Gap is a place that you get sent to if you haven't done the right thing in the United States as a military person. It's sort of like a banishment to the other side of the earth. It's a punishment to go posted to Pine Gap. And he was a child and reported that, overhearing adult conversation, that something interesting and unusual was tracked, an aerial phenomenon was tracked at Pine Gap. But how often that happens and comes across their screens, or whether they're particularly looking for it, who knows?
Yeah. We have Duncan from Palm Beach, Florida. Hi, Duncan. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Martin. Hi. Very quick question. I was curious, what, if anything, do the Aborigines in Australia say about this topic? Does it play any part in their traditions?
Interesting question.
Look, I would like to find out a lot more about that. Of course, people, I guess, have come across the Wandjina paintings, where I think Von Daniken pointed out a connection that people sort of enjoyed his connection with the way ETs apparently look, and the paintings with the big eyes on the cave paintings. I don't know much about that, and where the people who around the communities that have made these artworks live is very remote. The average Australian living in the cities doesn't really have the opportunity to have contact with the people in these regions, and I would really love to go and pursue that some more. But certainly there are long told stories of the spirits that they have contact with that are weaved into their culture. And it's, to talk about their culture, like the Aboriginal people had many different nations before they were colonised, and each had their own particular stories and languages. So it was like talking about the Europeans. What do the Europeans say? Well, it depends on what region, what country, what nation, what language. So it is a very complex thing that has been under-researched, in my opinion. I did talk to a fellow who phoned in when James Fox was offering, he came over when he was doing the Westall thing and went on national television offering a reward to anybody who had some information about physical evidence of a UFO. And a gentleman from I can't remember where it was somewhere in New South Wales, said that he had an experience as a school child, and a whole lot of school children saw the appearance of a UFO. These are Indigenous school children, and when he was a child, and they were on a mission, that's right. And I think the priest that was running the mission saw sounded similar to the Father Gill encounter, but the kids were very frightened by the appearance of this object. And this is a story, like, I don't know, he was using someone else's phone. I don't know how to get to him again, and I'd like to be able to travel and meet him and talk to him about his story. But, you sometimes lose contact with people, and stories get lost, which is a shame. but yeah, it really requires Australia. We're limited, but because of the physical distance and the remoteness and the low population, to be able to, you sort of need somebody to have a full-time job traveling and talking to people, and even just to get their trust to get them to talk about it, because the people here, the Indigenous people here, have been so badly treated through colonisation that they're not willing to share things, which I completely understand the traumatisation that they've been through, like the Knowles family, don't want to talk about things again because they've had it a bad time of it,
Yeah. Anything else, Duncan?
Yeah, no.
Does that answer your question? It doesn't really, does it?
No. That was actually, I actually did learn something from that, from your answer.
Mm.
Thanks.
Well, thank
a lot.
you.
Thank you.
I thought that was a great question. So thanks a lot, Duncan. Thanks for the call.
Bye-bye.
All right. So the line is open. That's 855-472-5483. Now, as far as the Aborigines, since you brought that up, that is they go way, way back in Australia. I mean, tens of thousands of years, don't they? I mean, their civilization there.
Some 60 to 80,000 years, I understand.
Mm.
It's
and so you mentioned that there are drawings, so they're like on stones and things like that. Are there rocks and things? Mm-hmm.
Rock paintings. So maybe this is a topic for another show, but there have been particularly in Western Australia, beings with very large eyes, sort of white beings with large eyes that are very reminiscent of what people report having seen the Rua children being with very large hypnotic black eyes. And so they talk about these as being the guardian spirits of that area, and the spirits that you have to ask permission to enter an area, and the spirits that they interact with. So it's another dimension. It's quite different to our materialistic culture that we're. It's a very spiritual culture, and very, very in touch with the workings of the earth and nature, and we're quite removed from that. Our lives couldn't be more different in the cities. I've heard a story about how the very old men, when they come into the city, the very old Indigenous elders, they move very slowly, and but then when you get them out into the bush, they move like lightning, because that's their natural environment, and they know how to get around, and they feel at home there. Whereas if they're in the city, it's overwhelming, and it's not their natural environment. They're quite different responses to their environment where they are. So it's a really fascinating field that needs to be researched more in many aspects, not just in the UFO aspect.
Right. I mean, that's similar to the Native Americans here that were here. There's the oral traditions from, way back. And there are some, I've seen them in person. Actually, in California, there were some rock paintings, nothing that looked like aliens, but still really fascinating to see. And I love when you come across things like that. So we have about 7 minutes left to this show, and we will take one more call if you'd like to call in. That's 855-472-5483. You're the Victorian UFO Action. Let's talk just a little bit about that. Is that set up where someone can find that easily online? And of course, I put up the wrong website when I did. And how do is that a place where people can report?
They certainly can. It's vufoa.net. That's our current website. The old one has been left up because there's a lot of historical information and videos on it. We will probably eventually bring that one down, but people might still want to look at some things that are on there. Andrew and Ben did some quite informative videos and interviews with people. So yeah, we are pretty much focused on being a point of contact for if somebody wants to express or relay an experience that they've had and they don't know where else to report it. And also we try to bring people over from, researchers from America in particular, but wherever, whoever wants to make the trek over so that they can answer questions.
Me. I want to go.
Sure. So this
I'm
is
not
how,
a researcher though. But
but anybody who wants to share their information, I'm sure people will be wanting to listen. So yeah, we're sort of stuck on the other side of the earth and we're pretty isolated geographically from the rest of the world. So we are very curious about and try and connect as much as we can to find out what's going on in this realm. So, yeah, we brought over Don Schmidt. So he spoke to us. Yeah. Of course, James Fox, he gave a great talk to us. There's constant interest in the Westall case. We're all volunteers, so, it's hard going to make an event more than once a year. But we did have an online link up. We had coronavirus lockdown and we had a great response to a little meetup to talk about local cases.
When you locked down there, unfortunately, it's really rough here in the United States right now. And I am a place where people like to go where they can forget about that for a little while. Don't want to focus on that, but Australia's done a wonderful job with COVID. Yeah. I mean, it's night and day, and we're not allowed there. If I wanted to fly there, you'd probably wrap me in plastic and put me in a room for 14 days or something.
14 days. You won't be allowed for a long time, I think, because of what's going on.
So we just got a couple minutes, actually 3 minutes or less. But I forgot to ask you, did you enjoy the United States? Because you took quite a trek when you were here. You went to Socorro, like you said.
Yes, we went to Socorro. We spent 4 hours on the Roswell field.
Wow, really?
I think the guys got directions from Chuck. What's his name? The guy from Ancient Aliens. He got one set of directions from Chuck and another set from Don, and we got confused and we missed a gate.
Are you talking about David Childress?
No, Chuck.
What was his first name?
Chuck.
Chikowski or something like that.
Yeah. So he was a great guy. We met him, and he gave us directions as to best way to get there, because it's quite in the middle of nowhere and quite remote, not easy to get to. So we spent a long time on the Roswell field, so we're very familiar with Roswell, where it happened. We visited Mark Brazel's grave as well. That was quite interesting to see where he was laid to rest. We went to Socorro and looked at where Lonnie Zamora saw his beings.
And didn't you go all the way up to Northern California too?
Oh, I went to visit James Fox. And met Walter Murch Jr., who did the sound on the phenomenon. We stayed in his place, and we had dinner with James and Rebecca, and met Ollie again. And we had a great time. We got to see where the phenomenon was being edited. We got to visit the edit studio.
Oh, the shack.
Yeah, the shack.
Yeah. Hey, we're out of time, Irene. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, it was a lot of fun. And we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Bye. All right, everyone. So that's it for our show this evening. Next week, as I mentioned, we have Whitley Strieber on. So that should be an interesting show. And I want to thank you all very much for joining us tonight. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.